What's up, Scyushi Squad? We back in with more Trove. And this video, for all intensive purposes, was supposed to come out yesterday, but I've just been exceptionally busy, so forgive me. I'm still trying to end up having these videos all on time. Frankly speaking, it's because I already had like 2 Chloromancer videos recorded, 2 Pirate Captain videos recorded, and then I ended up doing a reshoot of the Chloromancer at the end game, and I'm really glad that I did, but it means that basically a lot of the information that I talked about in those other videos needs to be recorded as re-recorded as well. So today we're going to be focusing on how you will build the Chloromancer. We're going to end up talking very slightly about the changes, so the patch notes with the most recent Shadowhunter rework update, which still isn't on console, which is quite ridiculous. Anyways, let's talk about this very, very briefly. So the Chloromancer ended up having a pretty significant nerf, and if you ended up checking out my other video in the 35K series, we basically showed that it didn't really make a difference in terms of Chloromancer being a boss killer. Chloromancer is still A+ S tier in terms of fighting Leviathans, but really struggles in other categories, at least in terms of soloing. So I wouldn't necessarily use the character as a speed farmer, just because going through dungeons and stuff is very tedious, and the time to kill you know, is very long, and the distance between traveling from dungeon to dungeon is also really bad as well, because the whole thing is that Chloromancer is kind of at that point, I would say, gameplay wise, it's kind of the same as Tomb Raider, where it takes a long time to set up all of the chess pieces, and then you're dealing insane amounts of damage so long as you can end up keeping that up. But anyways, let's talk about the changes. So the green Gatling damage has been decreased to 100%, down from 160%. Mini bloom damage, which is your passive ability of, you know, mini blooms just showing up while you're, whoops, there it is. Mini blooms just showing up while you're dealing damage. They just pop out and then start exploding. Mini bloom damage was decreased to 375, down from 450. Mini blooms have a lower chance of spawning, 10%, down from 20%. And then the biggest changes that really affected the Chloromancer is going to end up being the ultimate. So this is the big green Gatling damage has been decreased to 225, down from 380. The big green Gatling cooldown is now 12 seconds, up from 8 seconds, and you can now only have 2 out at a time, down from 3. And then the big leafy lasher damage has also been decreased to 200%, down from 220 or 250, sorry. And yeah, generally speaking, that's going to end up covering the changes with the Chloromancer. Now, very briefly, if you guys don't already know, the way that you pretty much have to play the Chloromancer now, just because these nerfs did end up affecting the Chloromancer very negatively, in that the way that I used to play the Chloromancer is I'm a big dummy. I just play things simple. It's like, duh, throw things down and fight, right? Well, now since they ended up nerfing it, we basically have to fight bosses in a very optimal fashion. So let's just say, for example, that I can only throw down 2 of my little turrets at a time, right? So we throw down 2, travel 10 blocks in distance, and then you can throw down an additional set of 2. This is when you're using your ultimate. Of course, when you're not in your ultimate, you would throw down 3, and you could throw down 3 over there. So you can actually throw down 2, 2, and 2. And that's going to end up being super optimal damage. It's just a weird way that Trove works, where you know, summons can end up negating the limit so long as they're 10 blocks away. It's very odd. But anyways, I just wanted to put that out there. Now let's talk about the stats that you're gonna have to be focusing on and stuff like that. Now, as this character being a boss killer means that you're basically focusing 100% on damage. So if you already know how to make a build like that, you can move on. You know, you don't need to watch through the rest of it, because I'm basically going to be explaining the same things that we've explained over the years. But generally speaking, for your gear, I would focus on having attack speed and crit damage, because again, you want to have the most damage possible. If you're absolutely like 100% want to main the Chloromancer for every aspect of the game, you definitely want to end up having movement speed as well instead of the crit damage, but that's entirely up to you. For the staff, you can end up getting energy regen on it, but it's not really going to make as much of a difference as you would think. Generally speaking, though, I think it would be wise to have attack speed and either crit damage or energy regen accordingly. I probably would end up swapping this back to energy regen myself, just because I found that the energy regen was a little bit lacking when I was trying to end up casting all of my plants and stuff. For the ring, Obviously, you can't, beggars can't be choosers. You're basically going for the highest tier of crystal ring possible. But the Gatling is going to end up being the best hidden effect, generally speaking, because it's just going to end up throwing down more Gatlings, which just increases your damage overall, right? For your ally, I would focus on Puck if you're just trying to deal with, like actual damage, because you want to end up having that cooldown reduction. But if you're trying to do speed farming or even just trying to survive in the delves, you might want to swap to Aviator just because it'll give you a little bit more survivability. You kind of got to change the build up quite a bit if you're trying to do something versus the delves and so on and so forth. For the banner, you basically just want to have one that ends up having the most light value, so Leviathan torches are going to be the best for that. For your flask, I always end up going for Death Defying. It's usually just the easiest one to go for because you're not going to have survivability on the character. So long as you've built your character fully towards dealing damage, it means that you're not going to end up having any health, which means that you have no survivability, which is why Death Defying is just kind of the standard for anything end game. I mean, you can end up using other flasks as well, but Death Defying is easy enough to get, and generally speaking, will get you through the entirety of the game. You will want to use Arcane Emblem because you're trying to deal damage, and rather than using the Evil Eye, you would be using Chromatic Emblem so that you can end up casting your plants as much as possible, because basically what you're going to end up doing when you're boss killing is kind of playing Chloromancer the same as old-timey gunslinger. So you're going to be super duper reliant on spamming your pots to reduce your cooldowns so that you can cast your plants as often as possible, which means that you are going to run out of flasks very quickly. So if you have somebody else tanking the damage, you could end up swapping to Elysian Bandolier just so that you have more flasks, or experiment and find another flask option that ends up working for you. But generally speaking, you are trying to focus on is this guy trying to get a picture? Generally speaking, you're going to be trying to focus on, your casting as often as possible. Now, if you're just doing like normal farming and stuff like that, other really, really good emblems is going to be Trailblazing, Unyielding, and Sure Strike. Those are kind of going to be the main standard ones that you would end up using for every aspect of the game. And then otherwise, for the subclass ability, I always just like to use the Knight subclass because not only does it give me more mount movement speed, which Chloromancer's movement speed is pretty bad, so mount movement speed is going to be very helpful, but also because of the extra flask capacity. That's going to be very, very helpful, especially with a character that's so flask reliant. Now, that said, if you want to have more damage, then you would end up using the Lunar Lancer subclass ability, because that's, when Lunacy ends up triggering, you essentially end up dealing more damage. But I mean, essentially, it's going to end up being completely up to you. Now, let's move on to the gems. Gems are not going to end up being as complicated as you would think. Oh, actually, before we do that, let me just mention the stats that you kind of want to aim for before we go to the gems. So for your magic damage, I'd say anywhere from 80,000 and up is going to end up getting you from kind of mid-game to end-game. Obviously being at around 150k at the end is going to end up being very useful. Your crit hit, you want to get as close to, if not 100%. That's where Sure Strike can compensate for a little while if you don't have the crit hit, but essentially you want to have 100%, and then anything extra you can just get rid of because of the way that Trove works. 100% crit means you are critting 100% of the time, unlike most other video games where it's just a weird additive stat. And then for your crit damage, I'd say anywhere from 800% and up. Obviously for late game, somewhere around the 2000 mark or so on and so forth. Coefficiency is something that a lot of people give me slack about, but generally speaking, from my testing, coefficiency doesn't really matter that much when you get to the end game. You're talking very, very small margins of extra damage. Now, that said, you might want to focus on your coefficiency a little bit more with the Chloromancer, just because of the fact that it is going to end up being a character that is focused on bosses, and those little margins will end up actually making a bit of a difference. That said, let's talk about the gems. So for your Cosmic and Power Gem, you want to go for Berserk Battler, just because that's going to be your big boy damage gem. If you have a Vampirium, you would only use that if you're trying to have survivability. So if you're trying to absolutely main the Chloromancer in like delves or farming and stuff like that, then maybe you could use Vampirium. But for the most part, you're going to be using Berserk Battler. Those are pretty much the only two good Cosmic Gems anyways. And then for your stats, you're going to try and get 3 pearls into light on all of your Cosmic Gems, okay? That's going to be really difficult at first, but eventually, when you're farming cosmic gems, you end up getting so many of them so frequently that it'll be more manageable than you think. And then, of course, the other stats are going to be magic damage and crit damage. For the other empowered gems, you kind of want to ignore what I've got here. So I have Cubic Curtain and Mired Mojo. You don't want Mired Mojo. I'd recommend that you have Cubic Curtain for survivability. Pyrodisc is a good one if you're trying to speed farm. Explosive Epilogue, I think, works for the Chloromancer's main shots, but I don't know whether or not it works for his mini turrets, because if it works for the little turrets, then Explosive Epilogue is mandatory. But somebody hopefully can correct me in the comments if you've tested it out and found out if Explosive Epilogue works on the allies themselves, or if it's just exclusive to the Chloromancer. Then it's not as big of a deal if you don't have it. But those are going to end up being kind of the main gems that you'll focus on. And then the stats that you want on these empowered gems, and then obviously the class gem, of course. The main pearls that you're going to be focusing on your empowered gems is going to be 2 pearls magic damage, 1 pearl crit damage, no pearls crit hit. You can end up having a variation of, you know, more pearls and crit damage versus the magic, but generally speaking, you want to have all of your pearls in the damage stats, and that's kind of the big thing that you're trying to focus on. Now, for the lesser gems, this is where I always just like to say, do a 3:3 ratio just because it's easier for my brain, but you don't have to follow this exactly, because a mixture can end up actually being a little bit better depending on how far you have it mixed. Because essentially what you're trying to do is have a nice blend between your base damage and your crit damage percent, okay? Because you don't want to end up having too much in either category specifically, because then the damage fall off is just going to end up being more significant. But generally speaking, you'll try to get 3 of your lesser gems to be the same as your empowered gems. So 2 pearls magic, 1 pearl crit damage, no pearl crit hit. And then the other 3 gems will end up being 2 pearls crit damage, 1 pearl magic damage, and then no pearls crit hit. Of course, if you end up having an overabundance of your crit hit percentage, you could swap any extra crit hit on your gems to max health, which will give you again a little bit more survivability, which is always nice because it means that you can tank more than 1 hit. But generally speaking, that's going to cover it. And like I said, you can go ahead and have a weird mixture. Like you can see I got 3 pearls on my crit damage on this gem. That's fine. It's not like I need to swap it off or anything like that. That's most of all if you're trying to get that absolute perfect goal of coefficiency, in which case you can end up having you know, different mixtures of what you're doing with your magic damage and your crit damage. But generally speaking, that should end up covering it. I guess lastly, I would say for food, I never use food, but you're just going to end up using the food item that gives you the most light. That's all there really is to it. Hopefully you ended up finding this video helpful though, gamers. I really appreciate your patience, just because I'm going to try and get these videos out to you as quickly as possible. But like I said, I've had a pretty messed up schedule lately. So yeah, hopefully you still enjoyed the video and found it helpful. Smash like, sub for more, buy the merch you want to support the channel, and have a wonderful day.